For my 33rd birthday, my parents did not bake a cake. They invited 50 of their closest country club friends, church elders, and business partners to our family estate, ripped down my birthday banner, and staged a surprise intervention. My father stood at the head of the room and called me the broken branch of the Washington family tree. My mother handed out literal printed lists of my perceived failures. My sister live-streamed the entire humiliation for her followers, while her wealthy white husband sipped expensive bourbon and laughed at my expense. I sat there quietly, letting them dig their own graves in front of half the city elite. Then I stood up, walked over to the massive television screen, and said, "Funny. I have been recording things too." What I showed them next ended 7 relationships before midnight. Let me tell you exactly how it happened. I walked through the heavy front doors of the Washington estate, expecting the usual tense birthday dinner. My parents, Desmond and Valerie, cared about one thing above all else: maintaining the flawless image of Black excellence in our affluent suburban neighborhood. Every milestone was a calculated performance, designed to show the world how successful, wealthy, and devout they were. I was the one child who refused to play along, which is why my stomach tied into knots the moment I crossed the threshold. The grand foyer was unnervingly quiet. I stepped down into the sunken living room, freezing in my tracks. 50 people were seated in rows of folding chairs. I recognized Pastor Higgins, several board members from my father's country club, and a dozen gossiping aunts. At the front of the room, the gold balloons that originally spelled out "Happy Birthday" Nia had been ripped down and tossed into a corner. In their place stood my father, holding a leather-bound notebook, looking like a judge ready to hand down a life sentence. "Take a seat, Nia," he commanded, his deep voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "We need to have a serious conversation, and we need our community here to witness it." I did not move. I just looked at the circle of expectant, judgmental faces staring back at me. "We are here today because you are selfish, ungrateful, and actively tearing this family apart." My father continued pacing in front of the massive stone fireplace. "You have become a toxic presence, a broken branch on the family tree. We have tried prayer, we have tried patience, but your bitter attitude is a poison we can no longer tolerate in silence." Right on cue, my mother Valerie stepped forward. She wore her Sunday best, a tailored pearl white suit, but her face was twisted with cold hostility. She began passing out thick stapled packets of paper to the guests in the front row. "I made copies," she announced loudly, making sure her voice carried to the back of the room. "These are just some of the incidents where Nia has deliberately tried to humiliate us and destroy her sister's happiness." Read page 3. Just last month, she completely ruined Chloe's dream wedding by stubbornly refusing to pay for the White Dove release. A simple request, and she turned it into a selfish argument about boundaries. I stared at the papers being passed around, a bitter taste rising in my throat. Ruining her dream wedding. The reality was that I had already paid the caterer, covered the floral arrangements, and booked the luxury bridal suite because my parents had secretly drained their savings trying to keep up appearances. The White Dove release was an extra $10,000 they demanded I put on my credit card. When I finally said no, I became the villain. I knew explaining the truth would only fuel their twisted narrative. I shifted my gaze to the right side of the room. There sat my younger sister Chloe, the undisputed golden child. She was curled up in a velvet armchair, dabbing at her completely dry eyes with a tissue. In her other hand, she held her phone up high, capturing every second of my public execution on a live stream for her thousands of followers. She sniffled loudly, performing the role of the innocent victim flawlessly. Standing right behind Chloe, leaning casually against the mantelpiece, was her new husband, Bryce. He was a wealthy white man from a prominent real estate family, or at least that was the story my parents loved to brag about. Bryce was their ultimate prize, the perfect son-in-law who elevated their social status. He swirled amber liquid in a crystal whiskey glass, his expensive tailored suit practically gleaming. When our eyes met, he flashed me a slow, arrogant smirk. He was thoroughly enjoying the show, reveling in the fact that the troublesome independent sister was finally being put in her place. "You have always been jealous of your sister," my mother continued, her voice rising to a theatrical pitch. "You are 33, unmarried, and working some quiet accounting job, while Chloe is building a magnificent life with Bryce. Instead of celebrating her, you withhold your support. We brought our community here tonight to demand that you repent, apologize to your sister, and commit to being a functional, supportive member of this family." The room was dead silent. 50 pairs of eyes watched me, waiting for me to break down or scream like the unstable woman my parents painted me to be. I took a breath. I walked past the chairs, ignoring the gasps. I stepped directly in front of the television above the fireplace, mere inches from where Bryce was standing. From my purse, I pulled out a sleek black USB drive and slotted it into the television. I turned to face my family and the guests, letting a razor-sharp smile spread across my face. "It is incredibly funny that you brought everyone here to talk about accountability," I said. "I have been recording things too." I pressed the silver button on my remote. The massive screen above the fireplace flickered and went black for a second before springing to life. It did not display a defense of my character or a heartfelt apology video like my parents surely expected. Instead, the screen filled with crystal-clear, high-definition security footage. The timestamp in the bottom right corner displayed a date from just 3 weeks ago, right around the time I was supposedly ruining Chloe's dream wedding. The camera angle showed a lavishly decorated hotel hallway. I knew the guests would recognize the distinctive carpet and gold sconces immediately. It was the Ritz-Carlton downtown, the exact hotel where my parents booked the bridal suite for Chloe and Bryce to spend the night before their ceremony. A figure walked into the frame. It was Bryce, wearing the custom-tailored navy suit he purchased for the rehearsal dinner. He stopped in front of room 412, looked over his shoulder with a cautious glance, and knocked twice. The heavy wooden door swung open a few seconds later. The woman standing in the doorway was not my sister. She was wearing a sheer silk robe, holding a glass of champagne. It was Sarah, Chloe, lifelong best friend and the maid of honor at her wedding. The same Sarah who was currently sitting in the second row of our living room, wearing a modest floral dress and holding a Bible. On the screen, Bryce stepped into the room, grabbed Sarah by the waist, and kicked the door shut behind them. The silence in my parents' living room was absolute. For 5 agonizing seconds, nobody moved or made a sound. The only noise was the soft hum of the television speakers. Then the spell broke. The heavy crystal whiskey glass slipped from Bryce's hand. It hit the stone hearth and shattered, sending shards of glass and expensive bourbon flying across my mother's pristine white rug. The sharp crash snapped Chloe out of her trance. She dropped her phone, leaving the live stream running as it tumbled onto the velvet armchair. She turned her head slowly, looking away from the television and locking eyes with Sarah. Sarah's face had drained of all color. She was paralyzed, clutching her Bible against her chest like a shield. Chloe let out a sound that was half scream and half sob. She lunged forward, diving over a row of folding chairs and tackling her best friend to the floor. The room erupted into absolute chaos. 50 members of the local elite church deacons, country club executives, and gossiping aunts began shouting and scrambling out of the way. Chloe grabbed handfuls of Sarah's hair, screaming obscenities, while Sarah flailed her arms, trying to protect her face. 2 church elders rushed forward, attempting to pull the 2 women apart, but Chloe fought with the manic strength of a completely broken woman. Amidst the screaming and the sound of overturning chairs, Bryce panicked. His arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a cornered animal. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his face turning an angry shade of crimson. "It is fake!" he shouted, his voice cracking as he tried to be heard over his wailing wife. "It is a deep fake. She used artificial intelligence to frame me. Look at the shadows on the screen. It is a computer-generated lie." I stood perfectly still, watching him unravel. My complete lack of reaction only made him angrier. He stepped toward me, his fists clenched at his sides. "You have always been obsessed with me, Naya," he yelled, spit flying from his lips. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who is jealous of her sister. You have been obsessed with white men your whole life, and because nobody wants you, you decided to use technology to destroy my marriage. It is a pathetic, desperate trick. I expected my parents to see through his ridiculous lie. The footage was undeniably real, and anyone with eyes could see it. But maintaining the illusion of their perfect family was more important than the truth. Desmond and Valerie rushed forward not to comfort their weeping daughter on the floor, but to protect their wealthy son-in-law. My father stood between me and Bryce, physically shielding the man who had just been exposed. My mother ran to the fireplace and frantically searched for the television power cord, pulling at cables with trembling hands. "Turn it off!" Valerie screamed. "Turn this garbage off right now! You are a sick and twisted girl, Nia. How could you fabricate something so vile just to ruin this gathering? You are embarrassing us right in front of Pastor Higgins and the entire congregation. You need psychiatric help." My father pointed toward the front door. "Get out of my house!" he bellowed, his face contorted with rage. "You brought this fake video here to tear down a good man because of your twisted jealousy. You are a disgrace to the Washington name." I looked at my mother, yanking at wires. I looked at my father, defending the man who humiliated his golden child. I looked at Bryce standing behind my parents, adjusting his jacket, confident that his white privilege would protect him from consequences. They were choosing the lie over the truth like they always did. I threw my head back and laughed. It was a loud, genuine laugh that cut through the shouting and the chaos. My laughter startled them so much that my father stopped yelling and Chloe stopped screaming. I raised my hand, holding the remote high in the air. "I figured you would blame technology, Bryce," I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying across the sudden silence. "I knew you would call it fake, and I knew they would defend you to save their face." I pressed the directional pad on the remote, navigating to the next file on my drive. "Let us see if you can blame the IRS." The television screen shifted from the hotel hallway to a stark white background filled with dense black text. They were federal tax returns and certified bank statements, heavily redacted in certain places to protect sensitive identification numbers, but undeniably authentic. The official seal of the Internal Revenue Service sat clearly at the top of the primary document. A collective murmur rippled through the 50 guests in the living room as people squinted, trying to comprehend the columns of negative numbers glowing above the stone fireplace. Bryce stopped yelling immediately. The angry red flush on his face drained away, leaving him the color of chalk. For the first time all evening, his posture crumbled. My parents had spent the last 2 years bragging to everyone in this room about Bryce and his prestigious heritage. They paraded him around the country club and church functions, introducing him as a brilliant real estate developer from old money. He was supposed to be the prize that elevated the Washington family to an entirely new echelon of suburban elite status. The documents on the screen told a completely different story. Bryce was not a wealthy heir. He was drowning in massive debt. The tax returns clearly displayed years of devastating losses, failing shell companies, and defaulted loans. His so-called exclusive real estate firm was nothing but a hollow front built on maxed-out credit cards and unpaid vendors. He was completely bankrupt. He drove a leased Bentley that my parents quietly paid the monthly installments on because they desperately wanted their neighbors to believe Chloe married into extreme generational wealth. They overlooked every red flag because his zip code blinded their usual judgment. They sacrificed me, the dutiful daughter, to cover the hidden costs of his fake lifestyle. I watched my mother stare at the negative balances, her mouth opening and closing, as she tried to process the mathematical reality of her golden son-in-law. But the bankruptcy was not the worst part of the presentation. I pressed the remote again, and a new document overlaid the tax returns. It was a high-definition scan of a wire transfer receipt from a major national bank. I highlighted a specific transaction and magnified it so the numbers filled the center of the screen. "I want everyone to look very closely at the origin and destination of this transfer," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the rising whispers. "That is a transfer of $150,000. The source account belongs to the Joint Retirement Fund of Desmond and Valerie Washington. The receiving account is an offshore entity registered in the Cayman Islands under a corporate umbrella completely controlled by Bryce. A loud gasp echoed from the front row. My father stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the leather sofa to steady himself. He handed over his life savings to a charming con artist to fund a fraudulent lifestyle, doing it willingly, to buy his way into a fake social circle. Bryce had literally stolen my parents' retirement right out from under them while sleeping with my sister best friend. But the true gravity of the situation was just beginning to set in for the rest of the audience. The 50 guests seated in our living room were not just friends or relatives. They were wealthy church elders, small business owners, and fellow country club members. Over the past 12 months, my father had used his impeccable reputation in the community to vouch for Bryce. Desmond had personally encouraged dozens of these people to invest their hard-earned money into Bryce-exclusive real estate ventures, promising them massive returns and guaranteed wealth. I watched realization wash over the crowd like a freezing tidal wave. If Bryce had stolen from his own father-in-law and was federally bankrupt, their investments were gone. The polite, elegant gathering evaporated in a matter of seconds. A well-dressed church deacon jumped out of his chair, pointing a shaking finger at Bryce. "Where is my money, thief?" he roared. An older woman in the second row began to weep loudly, realizing her entire pension was tied up in a fake property development. The living room descended into absolute mob chaos. The deacon who had just shouted at Bryce lunged forward, knocking over a tray of expensive catering. Another investor, a respected cardiologist, grabbed my father by the collar, demanding immediate accountability. They had trusted the Washington name blindly, and now that trust was exposed as a worthless, hollow liability. Guests pushed past the folding chairs, grabbing at my father and screaming demands. Bryce backed into the wall, trapped between the furious crowd and the fireplace, looking desperately for an exit. My father could not handle the destruction of his perfect image. The stress and the public humiliation were too much. Desmond gripped the left side of his chest, his breathing becoming shallow and ragged as he slumped heavily against the mantelpiece. He looked out over the angry mob of his former friends and turned his pleading eyes toward his eldest son. Pastor Marcus stood in the front row watching his family empire burn to the ground. Marcus was the moral authority of the Washington family, the respected religious leader who had always maintained order through his booming sermons and righteous intimidation. Marcus had always been the loudest voice in the room, using scriptures to manipulate our obedience. He thought he could easily silence me now, just like he had always done. Seeing his father falter, Marcus straightened his expensive suit jacket and stepped onto the raised hearth. He raised his arms high, demanding silence with his powerful voice. He pointed a holy finger of judgment directly at my face, boldly preparing to condemn me for exposing the painful truth and completely ruining the pristine family name forever. I did not back down. I tilted my head, studying my brother. "Are you sure you want to open your mouth right now, Marcus?" I asked softly. Marcus did not lower his finger. He inflated his chest, drawing in a massive breath and projecting his voice with the practiced resonance of a man used to commanding a megachurch congregation. The chaotic living room immediately quieted down. The panicked guests, desperate for a leader after watching my father collapse, looked toward Marcus for salvation. He stepped off the raised stone hearth and walked slowly toward me, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. He carried his Bible in his left hand, wielding it like a weapon as he prepared to deliver his righteous condemnation. "You have allowed the devil into your heart, Nia," he boomed, his voice shaking the crystal chandeliers above us. "You come into this blessed home on a day of celebration and spread wicked lies to destroy a family chosen by God. Bryce is a good man. Our parents are faithful servants. And you are nothing but a jealous demon sent here to test our faith and tear down the magnificent legacy we have built." He turned to the crowd, raising his arms in a theatrical display of pastoral sorrow. He played the victim perfectly, shifting the focus away from the stolen retirement funds and the hotel security footage. He painted my actions as a spiritual attack rather than a factual exposure of criminal behavior. Several of the older church members in the room actually nodded along, conditioned to believe every word that left his mouth. Deacons Marcus shouted, gesturing toward two large men standing near the entryway. Remove this woman from the premises immediately. She is no longer welcome in this house or in our congregation. Escort her out before she spreads any more poison. The two men stepped forward, rolling their shoulders. They had known me since I was a child, but their loyalty belonged entirely to the pastor who signed their paychecks. As they advanced, Marcus grew overconfident. The sound of his own voice fueled his arrogance, and he made a fatal mistake. He let his anger override his careful script. "You have always been an ungrateful burden to this family," Marcus yelled, his face slick with sweat. "You walked away from your sacred duties. For 5 years I let you manage the church ledgers. I gave you the privilege of handling our financial books, and you just abandoned your post. You left the administration in chaos because you were too lazy to do the work. You turned your back on the church, and now you try to destroy us with fabricated bank statements." A few people in the crowd gasped at his words, but I just smiled. He had just admitted it loud and clear for everyone to hear. He had forced me to do 5 years of unpaid, exhausting labor, managing the massive financial accounts of his megachurch. He called it a sacred duty, but it was actually a convenient way to keep a free, highly skilled forensic accountant on his payroll to cover his administrative tracks. He relied on my silence and my compliance to hide the messy reality of his financial empire. He kicked me out and called me a backslider the moment I refused to keep balancing his fraudulent spreadsheets. The two deacons reached me, reaching out their heavy hands to grab my arms. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I simply turned my head and fixed them with a stare so incredibly cold and authoritative that they both froze in their tracks. I did not need to fight them physically. My absolute lack of fear unsettled them. They looked at the massive television screen displaying the federal tax returns, then looked back at me, realizing that I was the one holding all the power in this room. The men slowly lowered their hands and backed away, refusing to do Marcus' dirty work. I turned my attention away from the deacons and looked at the front row. Sitting in a velvet chair directly across from me was Marcus' pregnant wife, Vanessa. She had both hands wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. Her face was a mask of sheer terror and absolute confusion. She had spent the entire evening watching her perfect world completely disintegrate. First, her best friend Chloe lost her husband to a cheating scandal. Then her wealthy father-in-law lost his life savings. Now her righteous husband was screaming like a madman and ordering men to physically attack his own sister. I looked at Vanessa and felt a sharp pang of genuine pity. She was a good woman who had been completely blinded by the Washington family illusion. She thought she had married a devoted man of God. She had no idea she was married to a ruthless, greedy narcissist who used the church donations as his personal piggy bank. She did not deserve the public humiliation that was about to rain down on her life, but I could not stop the momentum now. The truth had to come out completely and cleanly. I looked away from Vanessa and locked eyes with my brother. Marcus was breathing heavily, furious that his loyal deacons had retreated so easily. He opened his mouth to shout another angry command, but I quickly cut him off before he could speak. I lifted my right hand high and pointed the small black remote control directly at the television receiver. I stood there observing the absolute terror slowly replacing the fake righteousness painted across his sweating forehead. He finally understood my absolute control. "You did not fire me from the church financial books because I was lazy or ungrateful." "Marcus," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy, terrified silence of the living room. "You fired me from the church books and kicked me out of the congregation entirely because I asked way too many questions about the youth fund." I clicked the directional pad on the remote control. "Care to explain to your pregnant wife and loyal congregation where that money actually went? 1,000 words." The massive television screen shifted instantly, replacing Bryce and his hotel hallway scandal with a stark, side-by-side financial comparison. On the left side of the screen, I displayed the official internal ledger for the church youth ministry. The numbers were highlighted in a glowing, aggressive red, showing a massive deficit of nearly $300,000 over the exact 5-year period I was forced to manage the books. On the right side of the massive flat-screen television, I projected a highly detailed, high-definition scan of a property deed. It was for a luxury downtown penthouse condominium purchased entirely in cash under a holding company called Blessed Horizons LLC. The sole registered owner and primary beneficiary of that holding company was Pastor Marcus Washington. The collective gasp of pure horror from the church deacons and elders in the room was absolutely deafening. These were the men who had spent weeks fundraising, asking elderly parishioners to donate their fixed incomes to help the struggling youth programs. Now they were staring at undeniable proof that their beloved pastor had siphoned every single donated dollar into a real estate shell company to buy a private bachelor pad. Marcus opened his mouth to shout another defensive sermon, but I did not give him the chance to spin a narrative. I pressed the play button on my remote control, and an audio recording began to blast through the surround sound speakers. It was a crystal clear recording of a phone call Marcus had made just 2 weeks ago. His booming, unmistakable voice filled the living room, but he was not preaching from a pulpit. He was negotiating with a luxury car dealership. "I need the Porsche fully loaded and delivered to the downtown condo by Friday," Marcus said on the recording, his tone dripping with absolute arrogance. "Yes, put the title under the same LLC. It is a birthday gift for my girl. She is turning 22, so wrap a big red bow on the hood." I paused the audio and let the disgusting words hang in the suffocating silence of my parents' living room. Marcus, the righteous moral compass of our family, was using stolen church donations to buy luxury sports cars for a mistress barely out of college while his pregnant wife sat at home. I looked down at the front row. Vanessa, his pregnant wife of 6 years, was hyperventilating. Her hands trembled violently as she looked from the property deed on the screen to the sweating, terrified face of her husband. Marcus stepped toward her, reaching out a desperate hand to try and calm her down. "Vanessa, do not listen to this trickery," he pleaded, his voice cracking, completely stripped of its usual commanding power. She stood up so fast that her folding chair crashed backward onto the hardwood floor. She did not scream or cry. The betrayal was too absolute for tears. She slowly slid the massive diamond wedding ring off her finger. She looked Marcus dead in the eyes and threw the heavy ring directly at his face. It struck his cheek with a sharp thud, leaving a bright red mark on his skin, and bounced onto the rug. "Have your deacons pray for your soul, Marcus?" she whispered, her voice dripping with pure, absolute disgust. She turned around and marched straight out the front door, refusing to look back at the man who had destroyed their vows. The departure of his pregnant wife was the final nail in the coffin. The church elders sitting in the audience completely snapped. A senior deacon pulled out his phone and loudly announced that he was dialing the police to report felony ecclesiastical fraud and grand larceny. Another elder grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his tailored suit, shoving him aggressively against the stone fireplace. Within a span of 20 minutes, my family had completely imploded. 2 marriages were completely obliterated right before my eyes. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably on the floor over a cheating, bankrupt husband, while Vanessa was driving away from a thieving, corrupt pastor. Multiple professional relationships, business partnerships, and decades of carefully cultivated social prestige were entirely wiped out. The flawless image of Black excellence my parents had sacrificed me to maintain was now nothing but a spectacular burning pile of undeniable criminal evidence. Everyone in the room finally saw the Washington family for what they truly were. The guests who had eagerly attended my birthday ambush to judge me were now utterly disgusted by the people who invited them. Whispers of lawsuits and police investigations began to spread like wildfire across the chaotic living room, filling the air with a beautiful sense of impending justice. I expected my parents to finally show an ounce of remorse. I expected them to drop to their knees, apologize to the defrauded guests, and beg for forgiveness after seeing the absolute monsters they had raised and welcomed into their home. But toxic people do not apologize when they are backed into a corner. They attack the person holding the mirror. Instead of feeling shame, my parents felt furious exposure. They realized their elite status was gone forever. My mother, Valerie, suddenly charged at me like a wild animal. She pushed past the shouting church elders, her face contorted with a kind of demonic rage I had never seen before. Before I could even raise my hands to defend myself, she swung her arm with all her might and slapped me directly across the face. The sharp crack echoed over the shouting crowd, temporarily silencing the room. My cheek burned instantly, but I did not stumble. I kept my posture perfectly straight, staring down at the woman who gave birth to me. "Get out!" Valerie screamed, her voice tearing her throat as she pointed a shaking finger toward the front door. "Get out of this house right now! You are no daughter of mine!" I just smiled at her furious outburst, refusing to shed a single tear for her. The sting on my left cheek radiated outward, a hot, sharp pain that blossomed across my skin. My mother stood inches away from me, her chest heaving, her manicured hand still raised in the air. The crack of her palm against my face had echoed off the vaulted ceiling, temporarily silencing the chaotic living room. I slowly turned my head back to the center, making deliberate eye contact with the woman who gave birth to me. I did not raise a hand to touch my burning cheek. I did not step back. I simply let the absolute silence stretch out, waiting for the so-called righteous parents to do the right thing. 50 guests watched with bated breath. The church elders, the country club executives, the wealthy neighbors, they all expected the same thing I did. They expected my father to step forward and banish the two men who had just been exposed as ruthless criminals. They expected Desmond and Valerie Washington to disown the white son-in-law who stole their retirement savings and the pastor's son who robbed his own congregation to fund his infidelity. But toxic parents do not operate on logic or morality. They operate on image. To my parents, admitting that their golden children were married to monsters was a fate far worse than financial ruin. My father, Desmond, stepped onto the stone hearth. He did not look at Bryce cowering in the corner. He did not look at Marcus, who was furiously wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked directly at the crowd of investors and church members. He raised his hands in a gesture of paternal sorrow, shaking his head mournfully. "Nobody leave this room," he commanded, his voice dropping into a register of practiced authority. "Deacons, lock the front doors. I want everyone to hand over their mobile phones immediately. Nobody is posting a single word of this nonsense on the internet tonight." A few guests murmured in protest, but my father raised his voice, drowning them out. "What you have seen here tonight is nothing but a tragic display of mental illness," he declared, pointing a steady finger at me. "My daughter, Nia, is a profoundly sick and lonely woman. She has spent her entire life consumed by bitter jealousy, watching her siblings achieve greatness while she sat in the dark. She is a low-level accountant who clearly used her miserable computer skills to hack into federal databases and fabricate these disgusting documents. She doctored that video because she is obsessed with tearing down the pristine reputation of this family." I stood there listening to the man who was supposed to protect me completely assassinate my character to protect the men who robbed him blind. He was looking right at the federal tax returns, proving Bryce was bankrupt. He was looking right at the property deed, proving Marcus was a thief. Yet he chose to double down on the illusion. Admitting that his prized white son-in-law was a broke fraud would destroy his social standing at the country club. Admitting his eldest son was an adulterous thief would destroy his power at the megachurch. They needed the facade of black excellence to survive, and they were entirely willing to sacrifice me at the altar of public relations to keep the lie alive. My mother linked her arm through Bryce's arm, pulling the weeping con artist close to her side as if comforting a wounded child. She looked at me with pure hatred. "You see what you have done," Valerie yelled, her voice shrill and desperate. "You tried to destroy your sister's perfect marriage with your twisted artificial intelligence tricks. You tried to ruin your brother's holy ministry. You will never be half the woman Chloe is. You will never have a man like Bryce. You are dead to us, Nia." The absurdity of the moment washed over me like a cold, refreshing shower. I was not angry anymore. I felt an overwhelming sense of absolute liberation. They had made their choice. They chose the abusers over the victim. They chose the criminals over the truth-teller. I did not need to fight for their love or their approval ever again, because the people I had been trying to impress were nothing but shallow cowards living in a cardboard castle. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly walked past my mother, ignoring the venom in her eyes. I approached the massive television screen and firmly pulled my sleek black USB drive from the side port. The screen instantly went dark, leaving the living room bathed in the dim light of the crystal chandeliers. I dropped the drive into my designer handbag and snapped the gold clasp shut. I adjusted my tailored jacket, squaring my shoulders and lifting my chin. I turned and walked slowly toward the grand mahogany front doors. The guests parted like the Red Sea, stepping out of my way with wide, terrified eyes. Even the two deacons who had been ordered to lock the doors nervously stepped aside, unwilling to block the path of a woman who possessed my level of calculated composure. The air in the room was thick with tension, everyone waiting for me to scream or beg or throw a tantrum. But I offered them nothing but perfect regal posture. I reached the heavy front doors and placed my hand on the brass handle. Before I pulled it open, I paused. I slowly turned my head, looking over my shoulder at the pathetic group standing near the fireplace. My father was holding his hand out, demanding a phone from a trembling church elder. I smiled, letting the cold satisfaction ring through my voice. "You can keep the phones, Dad," I said, clearly ensuring every single person in the grand foyer heard my final words. "You can confiscate every device in this room. It will not make a difference." The files were already forwarded to the Department of Justice 30 minutes ago. I walked out the front doors, leaving the burning wreckage of the Washington family behind me. I did not look back. I did not wait for the police to arrive. I climbed into my car and drove away, feeling a sense of peace. But toxic people do not surrender when they are exposed. They rewrite the narrative to protect their fragile egos. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the counterattack had officially begun. I woke up to a barrage of notifications flooding my phone. Chloe had wasted no time weaponizing her most effective tool. She had gone live on social media, broadcasting to her hundreds of thousands of followers. I watched the pathetic video from my kitchen island, silently sipping my hot morning coffee. Chloe sat on her pristine white bed, looking utterly exhausted, wearing no makeup to emphasize her red, puffy eyes. She wept beautifully, wiping away carefully manufactured tears as she spun a magnificent web of absolute lies. "My sister Nia suffered a violent psychotic break last night," Chloe cried to the camera, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed trauma. "She has always struggled with severe mental illness and an unhealthy obsession with my husband, Bryce. Last night, she crashed my birthday dinner and projected heavily doctored fake images onto our television. She used deepfake technology to frame my husband and try to ruin my marriage because she is desperately lonely and completely detached from reality. We are heartbroken, and we ask for your prayers as we try to get her into a psychiatric facility." The internet comments poured in, offering endless prayers and deep sympathy for the poor victimized golden child. But Chloe was not the only one doing damage control. It was Sunday morning, and my brother Marcus was standing at his pulpit, delivering a passionate, fiery sermon to his megachurch congregation. I received an audio clip from an anonymous church member who had been at the party the night before. Marcus paced across the stage, gripping his microphone, sweating, as he yelled about spiritual warfare. "Sometimes the devil uses our own flesh and blood to attack our blessed ministries," Marcus preached to the cheering crowd. "Yesterday evening, my own sister surrendered her mind to the enemy. She fabricated malicious financial lies to destroy the sacred work we do for our youth. But we will not let the devil win. We must forgive family members who lose their minds to the dark forces and pray for their broken souls." By noon, the coordinated smear campaign had spread across the entire City High society. My parents worked the phones, calling every country club executive, every elite socialite, and every business partner who had witnessed the disaster. They aggressively pushed the same desperate narrative to anyone who would listen. Nia is a sick, unstable woman who photoshopped bank statements because she failed at life and wanted to destroy everyone who succeeded. They painted me as a low-level, jealous accountant who snapped under the pressure of being the family disappointment. The elite community, eager to protect their own investments and social standing, eagerly swallowed the lie without asking any questions. It was much easier for them to believe that I was crazy than to admit they had foolishly handed their entire life savings over to a bankrupt, pathetic con artist. Let them talk. I thought, shutting off my phone. I showered, dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, and drove downtown to begin my day. I did not work in a cramped cubicle pushing papers for a mid-level accounting firm, like my parents loved to claim to their friends. I pulled my car into the highly secure underground parking garage of a towering glass skyscraper located right in the heart of the financial district. I badged through 3 separate high-security checkpoints before reaching my assigned floor. The atmosphere in the office was buzzing with intense nervous energy. As I walked down the long corridor toward my corner office, several colleagues turned to look at me, whispering behind file folders and coffee cups. They had already seen the viral video Chloe posted online. They had heard the crazy sister narrative spreading across the internet like wildfire. I kept my posture perfectly straight, ignoring the rude stares, and walked directly to my desk without speaking. I barely had enough time to set my leather briefcase down onto my desk before the heavy glass door of my office swung violently open. It was Director Miller, the head of the division. His face was unreadable, a mask of pure professional intensity that signaled a serious crisis. "Nia," he said, his voice low and tight. "Bring your laptop and follow me to the secure conference room right now." I grabbed my device and followed him down the hall, stepping into the soundproof glass-walled room. He closed the blinds and locked the heavy door behind us. He turned to face me, placing both hands on the edge of the large mahogany table. "We have a massive situation," he said, staring directly into my eyes. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation just flagged a massive priority data package sent directly from your encrypted official account late last night. They reviewed the financial documents you forwarded regarding the Blessed Horizons holding company and the offshore shell accounts." I nodded, maintaining my absolute composure under his intense scrutiny. "The data is completely accurate, Director," I said. "I verified every single transaction personally before sending the file." Director Miller let out a long, heavy breath, rubbing the back of his neck and shaking his head in sheer, absolute disbelief. "I know the data is accurate, Nia," he replied, his voice rising with sudden urgency. "That is exactly the problem here. The federal agents saw the classified files you forwarded, and they are demanding an immediate emergency meeting with our department. They want to know why our lead forensic investigator is personally involved in exposing a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme run by her own family." I walked out the front doors, leaving the burning wreckage of the Washington family behind me. I did not look back. I did not wait for the police to arrive. I climbed into my car and drove away, feeling a profound sense of peace. But toxic people do not surrender when they are exposed. They rewrite the narrative to protect their fragile egos. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the counterattack had officially begun. I woke up to a barrage of notifications flooding my phone. Chloe had wasted no time weaponizing her most effective tool. She had gone live on social media, broadcasting to her hundreds of thousands of followers. I watched the pathetic video from my kitchen island, silently sipping my hot morning coffee. Chloe sat on her pristine white bed, looking utterly exhausted, wearing no makeup to emphasize her red, puffy eyes. She wept beautifully, wiping away carefully manufactured tears as she spun a magnificent web of absolute lies. My sister Nia suffered a violent psychotic break last night. Chloe cried to the camera, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed trauma. She has always struggled with severe mental illness and an unhealthy obsession with my husband Bryce. Last night, she crashed my birthday dinner and projected heavily doctored fake images onto our television. She used deepfake technology to frame my husband and try to ruin my marriage because she is desperately lonely and completely detached from reality. We are heartbroken, and we ask for your prayers as we try to get her into a psychiatric facility. The internet comments poured in, offering endless prayers and deep sympathy for the poor victimized golden child. But Chloe was not the only one doing damage control. It was Sunday morning, and my brother Marcus was standing at his pulpit delivering a passionate, fiery sermon to his megachurch congregation. I received an audio clip from an anonymous church member who had been at the party the night before. Marcus paced across the stage, gripping his microphone, sweating, as he yelled about spiritual warfare. Sometimes the devil uses our own flesh and blood to attack our blessed ministries, Marcus preached to the cheering crowd. Yesterday evening, my own sister surrendered her mind to the enemy. She fabricated malicious financial lies to destroy the sacred work we do for our youth. But we will not let the devil win. We must forgive family members who lose their minds to the dark forces and pray for their broken souls. By noon, the coordinated smear campaign had spread across the entire city high society. My parents worked the phones calling every country club executive, every elite socialite, and every business partner who had witnessed the disaster. They aggressively pushed the same desperate narrative to anyone who would listen. Nia is a sick, unstable woman who photoshopped bank statements because she failed at life and wanted to destroy everyone who succeeded. They painted me as a low-level jealous accountant who snapped under the pressure of being the family disappointment. The elite community, eager to protect their own investments and social standing, eagerly swallowed the lie without asking any questions. It was much easier for them to believe that I was crazy than to admit they had foolishly handed their entire life savings over to a bankrupt, pathetic con artist. Let them talk, I thought, shutting off my phone. I showered, dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, and drove downtown to begin my day. I did not work in a cramped cubicle pushing papers for a mid-level accounting firm like my parents loved to claim to their friends. I pulled my car into the highly secure underground parking garage of a towering glass skyscraper located right in the heart of the financial district. I badged through 3 separate high-security checkpoints before reaching my assigned floor. The atmosphere in the office was buzzing with intense, nervous energy. As I walked down the long corridor toward my corner office, several colleagues turned to look at me, whispering behind file folders and coffee cups. They had already seen the viral video Chloe posted online. They had heard the crazy sister narrative spreading across the internet like wildfire. I kept my posture perfectly straight, ignoring the rude stares, and walked directly to my desk without speaking. I barely had enough time to set my leather briefcase down onto my desk before the heavy glass door of my office swung violently open. It was Director Miller, the head of the division. His face was unreadable, a mask of pure professional intensity that signaled a serious crisis. "Nia," he said, his voice low and tight. "Bring your laptop and follow me to the secure conference room right now." I grabbed my device and followed him down the hall, stepping into the soundproof glass-walled room. He closed the blinds and locked the heavy door behind us. He turned to face me, placing both hands on the edge of the large mahogany table. "We have a massive situation," he said, staring directly into my eyes. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation just flagged a massive priority data package sent directly from your encrypted official account late last night. They reviewed the financial documents you forwarded regarding the Blessed Horizons holding company and the offshore shell accounts." I nodded, maintaining my absolute composure under his intense scrutiny. "The data is completely accurate, Director," I said. "I verified every single transaction personally before sending the file." Director Miller let out a long, heavy breath, rubbing the back of his neck and shaking his head in sheer absolute disbelief. "I know the data is accurate, Nia," he replied, his voice rising with sudden urgency. "That is exactly the problem here. The federal agents saw the classified files you forwarded, and they are demanding an immediate emergency meeting with our department. They want to know why our lead forensic investigator is personally involved in exposing a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme run by her own family." Director Miller stared at me across the polished conference table, waiting for an explanation. I did not blink or show a single ounce of panic. I looked directly into his eyes and told him the absolute truth without hesitation. "I am involved because the primary architect of this entire financial fraud is my arrogant brother-in-law and the primary recruiters for his Ponzi scheme are my father and my brother, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I discovered their illegal operation while reviewing a highly suspicious real estate transaction linked to a federal tax evasion case we were already monitoring closely. I gathered all the evidence independently and forwarded it to the Bureau because absolutely no one is above the law director, not even my own blood. Miller leaned back in his leather chair, processing my clinical detachment to my own family treason. The Bureau wants to take the lead on this case immediately, he warned. They are prepping multiple arrest warrants as we speak right now. I shook my head and leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the table. Tell the federal agents to hold their fire for exactly 72 hours, I requested. My family is currently running a desperate smear campaign across the city, trying to paint me as a psychotic, jealous woman who fabricated evidence to ruin a wedding. If the Bureau arrests them right now, they will spin it as a witch hunt and play the innocent victims to the press. Let me handle the immediate public fallout. Let them think they have completely won the battle. I promise you, Director, they are arrogant enough to hang themselves with their own rope. Miller reluctantly agreed to give me 3 days. I walked out of the office and initiated absolute radio silence. I deactivated my social media accounts. I ignored the hundreds of frantic text messages and blocked incoming calls from unknown numbers. I did not post a defensive statement online. I did not release an angry public rant to clear my name. My calculated silence was the ultimate bait, and my family eagerly swallowed it whole. In the world of toxic narcissists, silence is always interpreted as absolute weakness. Because I was not fighting back online, my parents and my sister falsely assumed I was terrified, hiding in my dark apartment and waiting for the storm to pass. They foolishly mistook my tactical restraint for complete and utter defeat. Empowered by my lack of response, Chloe and Bryce decided to aggressively capitalize on their fake victimhood. They did not just want to salvage their ruined reputation, they wanted to profit from it financially. By Tuesday evening, Chloe launched an official online crowdfunding campaign titled Rebuilding Our Lives After Cyber Harassment. She posted a tearful video alongside the campaign begging the general public for financial assistance. She looked directly into the camera lens with perfectly practiced sad eyes, claiming that my deepfake hacking had frozen their legitimate business accounts and left them entirely destitute. She sobbed about how her dream of starting a family was now ruined by a bitter sister who wanted to destroy her happiness. The audacity was almost breathtaking, but my father Desmond took it a step further. Utilizing his extensive connections and pristine country club reputation, he contacted a prominent local television producer. On Wednesday morning, my parents and Chloe sat on the velvet couches of a popular morning news show, broadcasting their magnificent lies to the entire metropolitan area. My father looked into the camera with a perfectly crafted expression of paternal grief. He wiped away a fake tear and asked the community to rally around his innocent son-in-law and his victimized pregnant daughter. He begged the city to support the crowdfunding campaign to help them recover from the malicious digital attacks of a disturbed family member who had completely lost touch with reality. The response from the elite social circles and the loyal megachurch congregation was instantaneous and overwhelmingly generous. Wealthy neighbors, devoted church members, and highly sympathetic strangers opened their wallets without hesitation. They truly believed they were supporting the righteous pillars of Black excellence against a senseless digital tragedy. They enthusiastically wrote massive checks, thinking they were doing the sacred work of God. I watched from a secure federal monitoring room as the donation numbers on their campaign page skyrocketed rapidly. Within just 3 short days, the total amount of donated cash crossed the astonishing $500,000 mark. The atmosphere inside the dark surveillance room was thick with anticipation. 3 heavily armed federal agents sat beside me, watching the glowing computer monitors tracking every single digital transaction flowing directly into Bryce and Chloe personal bank accounts. An older veteran agent sitting to my left shook his head in absolute disgust as another $10,000 anonymous donation ticked onto the digital screen. "They are stealing $500,000 in broad daylight," he muttered, sipping from a styrofoam coffee cup. It is incredible how easily vulnerable people give away their entire life savings to a manipulative man who cries on national television. I sat back comfortably in my heavy leather chair, crossing my arms over my chest, and watching the bright green numbers climb higher and higher with every passing minute. I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. The carefully laid trap had worked flawlessly. My family thought they had successfully outsmarted me and outran their devastating bankruptcy by playing the ultimate tragic victims for the cameras. They had absolutely no idea they had just sealed their own inescapable fate. Bryce thought he was incredibly clever, but his insatiable greed just gave us the perfect silver bullet, I said, keeping my eyes locked on the glowing monitor. By deliberately soliciting public funds under completely false pretenses across state lines utilizing the internet and broadcasting television networks, Bryce just turned a messy state-level fraud into a massive federal felony. 3 days later, the Washington family decided to celebrate their magnificent survival with a lavish private dinner. They booked the most expensive banquet room at the Oak Ridge Country Club, an exclusive venue that required a massive upfront deposit. My parents did not use their own depleted checking accounts to pay for the evening. They used the newly acquired GoFundMe cash, transferring the illicit public donations directly into the country club corporate account to fund a night of absolute luxury. I sat in the federal surveillance vehicle parked discreetly half a mile down the road, watching the event unfold through a live feed provided by an undercover agent posing as a catering waiter. The banquet room was decorated with towering floral arrangements and crystal centerpieces. Waiters circulated with silver trays of expensive caviar and imported champagne. My family sat at the head table looking like royalty who had just successfully crushed a peasant rebellion. They ordered premium steaks and laughed loudly, completely ignoring the reality of their criminal actions. The menu for the evening was an absolute masterpiece of culinary excess, carefully selected by my mother to project an aura of unshakable wealth. The guests dined on perfectly seared Wagyu beef medallions topped with shaved black truffles and butter-poached lobster tails. They washed it all down with bottles of vintage Dom Perignon that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Every single bite they took, every drop of wine they swallowed, was funded entirely by the fraudulent generosity of people they secretly despised. They were literally eating the stolen life savings of elderly church members while sitting in a room filled with those very same victims. Chloe could not resist the urge to perform for her audience. She propped her phone against a crystal vase and started an Instagram live broadcast right from the dinner table. She was wearing a stunning emerald green designer dress and a brilliant diamond necklace that caught the light perfectly. Her hair and makeup were completely flawless, erasing any trace of the supposed trauma she claimed to be suffering from just a few days prior. "Thank you all so much for your incredible support," Chloe said to her thousands of watching followers, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "This week has been a living nightmare for my husband and me. The cyber attacks and the vicious lies spread by my deeply disturbed sister almost broke us. We prayed for her troubled soul every single night. But looking around this beautiful room tonight, I realized that love always conquers hate. My sister tried to destroy our lives because she was jealous and terrified of her own miserable reality. She ran away like a coward the moment her fake hacking was exposed. She is hiding in the shadows while we are standing in the light. Thank you for giving us the financial resources to rebuild our stolen peace." She blew a kiss to the camera and ended the broadcast. The moment the recording stopped, her sweet smile vanished instantly, replaced by a smug, arrogant grin as she took a large sip of her champagne. Bryce stood up next, tapping his silver spoon against his crystal glass, to command the attention of the 50 wealthy guests seated around the banquet hall. These were the exact same elite church members and business partners who had attended my birthday ambush. They had blindly rushed to support my family, buying the victim narrative without demanding a single shred of actual evidence. Bryce raised his glass high, his tailored suit jacket perfectly fitted to his shoulders. "To family, Bryce declared, his voice echoing across the elegant dining room. We faced an unprecedented attack from a jealous outsider who wanted to tear down everything we have built together. She thought she could break our unbreakable bond with fabricated bank statements and disgusting rumors. But she fundamentally underestimated the power of the Washington family, and she underestimated the fierce loyalty of this incredible community. We defeated her malicious lies because we stand together in truth and prosperity. The guests erupted into enthusiastic applause, raising their glasses to toast the manipulative con artist who was actively stealing their retirement funds. My father Desmond rose from his chair, beaming with absolute pride. He buttoned his suit jacket and looked out over the crowd of his wealthy peers, his chest inflated with massive ego. The Washington legacy is built on unyielding resilience, my father proclaimed, his voice resonating with deep pastoral authority. Black excellence is not just a catchphrase for us. It is a divine standard that we uphold every single day. We do not let bitter failures dictate our future, even when those failures share our last name. We cut the dead branches from our family tree so the healthy roots can continue to flourish and grow. We survived this vicious test of faith because our foundation is solid and our reputation is entirely bulletproof. The elite crowd cheered loudly, nodding in agreement, as they clapped for my father's ridiculous display of absolute arrogance. Valerie smiled brightly, reaching out to hold her husband's hand, her pearls gleaming under the dim romantic lighting of the banquet hall. They raised their crystal champagne glasses high into the air, preparing to toast their magnificent triumph over the truth. But the elegant clinking of their expensive crystal glasses was abruptly completely drowned out. A deafening mechanical roar suddenly ripped through the quiet suburban night air, vibrating the heavy glass windows of the country club. A massive federal surveillance helicopter abruptly dropped out of the dark night sky, hovering dangerously directly above the luxurious banquet hall dining room. The blinding white beam of a tactical spotlight pierced through the large glass windows, illuminating the horrified faces of the wealthy guests. Before my father could even lower his champagne glass, the incredibly loud, screeching tires of 10 armored black sport utility vehicles echoed across the freshly manicured lawn as heavily armed federal agents completely surrounded the entire outer perimeter of the building. The heavy double oak doors of the grand banquet hall were violently kicked apart by specialized federal agents wearing dark tactical gear and protective ballistic vests. The deafening crash of the wood hitting the marble walls completely paralyzed every single person in the room. The elegant classical string quartet that had been playing softly in the corner stopped playing immediately as a young violinist dropped her bow in absolute terror. Federal Bureau of Investigation. A booming voice commanded over a megaphone echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Nobody move. Keep your hands exactly where we can see them. The stunned silence shattered into panicked screams. Women in evening gowns shrieked, dropping expensive leather clutches. Men in tuxedos instinctively raised their hands, spilling vintage wine across pristine white tablecloths. The brilliant tactical spotlight from the hovering helicopter continued to sweep across the dining room, casting harsh, frantic shadows over the extravagant feast my parents had just purchased with stolen funds. Dozens of federal agents swiftly swarmed past the long silver trays of untouched caviar and butter-poached lobster tails. They moved with terrifying precision, securing exits and establishing total control over the terrified crowd. The 50 elite guests who had blindly supported my family's smear campaign watched in absolute horror as the reality of the situation finally crashed down upon them. These were the exact same local business owners and devout megachurch elders who had just donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to Chloe's fraudulent crowdfunding campaign. They had believed they were financially rescuing a persecuted family of righteous victims. Now, they were standing frozen in their expensive formal wear, watching the federal government raid a private party like a cartel takedown. The sickening realization that they had been completely conned by the very people hosting this luxurious dinner began to spread rapidly across the frightened audience. Bryce did not stand his ground and defend his wife like the brave white knight he always pretended to be. The moment he saw the bold yellow letters printed across their armored vests, His survival instincts overrode his manufactured loyalty. Bryce dropped his crystal champagne flute, letting it shatter against the floor, and immediately bolted away from the head table. He shoved a terrified elderly church deacon out of his path and made a desperate sprint toward the swinging metal doors of the catering kitchen. He crashed through the doors, knocking a startled waiter to the ground. But the federal agents had already anticipated his cowardly escape route. Two massive agents intercepted him near the industrial dishwashing station. Bryce slipped on the wet tile floor, his expensive Italian leather shoes losing all traction. An agent aggressively tackled him mid-stride, slamming Bryce directly into a metal cart piled high with dirty dishes. The cart toppled over with a tremendous crash, burying the fake millionaire under a mountain of broken porcelain, mashed potatoes, and greasy dishwater. The agent pressed his knee firmly into Bryce, back-snapping heavy steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists, while Bryce sobbed pathetic apologies into the filthy floor. Back in the main dining room, Pastor Marcus tried a completely different but equally desperate tactic. Seeing the federal agents advancing toward the head table, Marcus fell to his knees in the center of the room. He clasped his hands together tightly, shut his eyes, and began to loudly pray, attempting to weaponize his religious authority to shield himself from the law. "Heavenly Father, protect your faithful servants from this wicked persecution," Marcus yelled, his booming preacher voice trembling with fear. "Guide these officers away from your blessed family and shield us from the devil lies." His loyal church elders watched their beloved pastor desperately praying for salvation, but the seasoned authorities were completely immune to his cheap, theatrical performance. A senior agent stepped directly behind Marcus, grabbing his clasped hands and forcefully wrenching them apart right in the middle of his fervent prayer. Marcus let out a sharp gasp of shock as the cold metal cuffs clicked securely around his wrists. The agent hauled the disgraced pastor to his feet, exposing his hypocritical cowardice to the entire horrified congregation. Watching his two golden sons-in-law being violently physically restrained and treated exactly like common street criminals broke my father completely. Desmond Washington could not handle the devastating destruction of his pristine public image. His massive ego demanded that he reassert his dominance over the situation. Valerie stood beside him, clutching her pearl necklace and hyperventilating in sheer panic. Desmond puffed out his chest, adjusting his jacket with shaking hands, and marched aggressively toward the tactical commander. "You are making a catastrophic mistake," Desmond roared, his voice echoing across the silent dining hall. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am a prominent member of this community and a senior board member of this country club. You are violating my civil rights by storming into a private establishment. I demand to speak to whoever authorized this illegal harassment right now. I want my lawyer on the phone immediately, and I promise you will all lose your badges for this completely unacceptable display of racial profiling." The highly trained tactical commander did not even flinch at my father's loud, arrogant threats. He stood perfectly still, allowing Desmond to finish his desperate, furious rant. The commander calmly reached into his heavy tactical vest and pulled out a thick, heavily stapled stack of legal documents. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and shoved the heavy 40-page federal indictment firmly into my father's chest, forcing Desmond to physically grab the paperwork. Desmond looked down at the documents, his confident expression instantly evaporating as he read the bold official seal of the United States Department of Justice. The tactical commander stared directly into my father's terrified eyes, his voice steady and completely devoid of any sympathy. "You definitely do not need a lawyer right now, Mr. Washington," the commander said very clearly. "You need to pray. The lead investigator wants to see you downtown." The cold steel walls of the federal interrogation room offered absolutely no comfort to the disgraced king and queen of suburban high society. Desmond and Valerie Washington sat at a scratched metal table completely stripped of their luxurious surroundings and their sycophantic audience. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed loudly overhead, casting deep, unflattering shadows across my mother-ruined designer makeup. They had been sitting in the windowless room for over an hour, but their toxic arrogance had not diminished in the slightest. My father paced back and forth across the linoleum floor, furiously straightening his expensive tuxedo jacket and shouting angry threats at the dark two-way glass mirror embedded in the wall. He genuinely believed that his pristine country club reputation and his massive ego could intimidate the federal government into an immediate apology. He slapped his hand flat against the heavy metal door, demanding to be released, demanding a hot cup of premium coffee and aggressively demanding to speak with the highest-ranking official in the building. This is an absolute outrage and a blatant display of unconstitutional racial profiling, Desmond roared, his booming voice bouncing uselessly off the soundproof walls. I am a highly respected business leader in this community. I serve on the executive board of the Oak Ridge Country Club. I know the mayor personally, and I promise you will all be looking for new jobs by tomorrow morning. You have violently traumatized my pregnant daughter and dragged my innocent wife out of a private celebration like common criminals. We are victims of a massive misunderstanding, and my legal team will sue this department into absolute bankruptcy for the emotional distress you have caused my family tonight. Valerie sat in a rigid metal chair, nodding vigorously in agreement while trying to rub the dirt off her ruined pearl necklace. She complained bitterly about the uncomfortable seating and the complete lack of respect shown to people of their distinguished social standing. They were both entirely convinced that this was just a temporary, terrible mistake that could be fixed with enough aggressive intimidation and loud complaints. They were still confidently yelling at the dark glass mirror when the heavy deadbolt on the metal door suddenly clicked open. The loud mechanical sound instantly froze their furious ranting. They both turned toward the entryway, expecting to see a terrified junior agent coming to offer them a profound official apology and a ride back to their massive estate. Instead, the room fell completely dead silent as I stepped through the doorway and let the heavy door slam shut behind me. I did not look like the quiet, submissive daughter they were used to bullying at Sunday dinners. I was not wearing the modest, inexpensive clothes they constantly mocked to make themselves feel superior. I was dressed in a razor-sharp, custom-tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit that radiated absolute authority and lethal precision. My posture was perfectly straight, and my expression was completely devoid of any familial warmth or daughterly affection. I carried a massive, thick black binder under my right arm, packed tightly with hundreds of pages of undeniable criminal evidence that would destroy them entirely. My mother gasped sharply, raising a trembling hand to cover her open mouth. She stared at me as if a ghost had just materialized inside the federal building. My father froze mid-stride, his angry demands completely dying in his throat. He looked at my expensive suit, then looked at the heavy binder in my hands, trying desperately to comprehend why his discarded scapegoat daughter was walking freely inside a highly secure federal interrogation room. His eyes slowly traveled up my lapel and stopped abruptly. His jaw physically dropped open as he finally registered the shiny metal identification badge securely clipped to the breast pocket of my tailored jacket. He squinted under the harsh fluorescent lighting, reading the bold black letters printed directly beneath my official government photograph. Department of Justice, lead forensic auditor. The crushing reality of the situation hit my father like a freight train. The daughter he had spent 33 years calling stupid, lazy, and worthless was actually the senior federal agent entirely responsible for dismantling his massive criminal empire. He staggered backward, his knees hitting the edge of the metal chair as the last remaining shreds of his massive ego completely evaporated. He finally understood that there was no artificial intelligence framing his son-in-law. There was no temporary misunderstanding to clear up with the mayor. There was only a highly skilled forensic investigator who had meticulously tracked every single stolen dollar hiding behind their fake righteous facade. He realized that the woman he had just publicly humiliated at a country club dinner was the exact same woman holding his entire life and freedom in the palm of her hand. I walked slowly to the center of the room, maintaining unbroken eye contact with the man who had ordered deacons to physically throw me out of my childhood home just a few days prior. I did not scream or gloat. I did not need to raise my voice to demonstrate my absolute power over their broken lives. I stood over the scratched metal table, and let the silence suffocate them both. I raised my right arm high and forcefully dropped the heavy black binder directly onto the cold metal table with a deafening loud thud. The sharp, sudden, violent noise echoed loudly off the bare steel walls and made my terrified mother flinch violently in her uncomfortable chair. I placed both of my hands perfectly flat on top of the massive stack of undeniable financial evidence, leaning forward slightly to ensure my father heard every single syllable clearly. You proudly told everyone at the elite country club that I was a complete and absolute failure, Dad. I said, my voice ice cold and razor sharp in the quiet room. Let us see exactly how my pathetic failed math skills look on your official federal indictment tonight. My father stared at the heavy black binder on the metal table as if it were a live explosive. The arrogant bluster that had defined his entire existence completely vanished, leaving behind a terrified, desperate old man. He slowly looked up from the federal seal on the cover and met my eyes. He swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing nervously against his expensive silk collar. Valerie sat perfectly still next to him, her breathing shallow and erratic. Then the survival instincts of a narcissist kicked in. My father immediately tried to change the narrative. He pushed his chair back slightly and held his hands up in a gesture of absolute surrender, mixed with fake victimhood. Nia, you have to listen to me, Desmond pleaded, his voice cracking with manufactured panic. We had absolutely no idea what Bryce was doing. He manipulated us. He used my standing in the church and the country club to legitimize his real estate business. We are victims here just like everyone else. We trusted him because he was Chloe's husband. We thought he was a successful developer from a wealthy family. We never would have encouraged our friends to invest if we knew he was running a Ponzi scheme. You have to believe us. We were completely tricked by a professional con artist. My mother eagerly latched onto the lifeline my father threw out. She leaned forward, tears welling in her eyes, attempting to play the loving mother who had simply made a terrible mistake. Nia, please, Valerie cried, reaching her hand across the scratched metal table. Bryce deceived all of us. He is a monster. But we are your parents. We raised you in the church. You know we are good, God-fearing people. We were just trying to help our son-in-law build his business. You cannot put us in prison for trusting the wrong person. Please, sweetheart, you have to help us fix this terrible misunderstanding. I did not reach out to take her hand. I looked at the two of them, watching them effortlessly throw their prized white son-in-law under the bus the second their own freedom was threatened. I calmly unclasped the metal rings of my evidence binder. The loud snap echoed sharply in the interrogation room. You are not innocent victims, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. You are the primary co-conspirators. You knew Bryce was completely bankrupt the day he asked Chloe to marry him. You knew his old money background was a complete fabrication, but you wanted a white son-in-law so badly to elevate your social status that you willingly funded his criminal enterprise. I pulled a thick stack of yellowed papers from the very back of the binder and slid them across the table. They were not recent financial records. They were loan applications and banking documents dated exactly 10 years ago. My father's face drained of all remaining color the moment he recognized the specific letterhead. When I was 18 years old, I applied for student loans to pay for my college tuition. I said, tapping my index finger against the top document. The bank denied my application because my credit score was completely destroyed. Someone had taken out massive business loans in my name and defaulted on every single payment. You sat me down in our living room and yelled at me. You called me financially irresponsible. You told the entire family that I had ruined my own future, and you kicked me out of the house because you said you could not support a failure. My mother pulled her hand back from the table as if the metal surface had suddenly caught fire. She pressed her back hard against the chair, staring at the 10-year-old documents in absolute terror. But I was not the one who took out those loans. I continued, leaning closer to my parents. You forged my signature on those applications, Dad. You and Mom deliberately stole my identity when I turned 18. You used my clean credit to take out massive fraudulent loans because you needed cash to fund Bryce's initial real estate startup. You knew he was a broke fraud from day one. You actively chose a criminal over your own daughter to maintain your prestigious country club image. You destroyed my credit, ruined my college plans, and threw me onto the street just to buy a fake millionaire lifestyle for Chloe. The silence in the interrogation room was suffocating. There was no way to spin this. There was no way to blame Bryce for a crime they had committed with their own hands a decade ago. I had spent years quietly untangling their financial web, building my entire career at the Department of Justice just to reach this exact moment. I had traced every single stolen dollar back to the very beginning. They had sacrificed their own child at the altar of black excellence, and now that same child was the federal agent holding their execution warrant. You thought I was just a bitter failure hiding in the shadows, I said, standing up straight and looking down at the two pathetic people sitting before me. You thought you got away with identity theft and financial fraud, but all you really did was give me the exact motivation I needed to become the best forensic auditor in the federal government. I know every account you possess. I know every shell company you operate. I know exactly how much stolen money is currently sitting in your personal bank accounts. I pulled a typed document from my binder, placing it gently on the table with a black pen. I did not raise my voice, but the weight of my authority pressed heavily on their shoulders. You have a choice, I said, voice ice cold. Sign the confession and forfeit the suburban mansion to pay back the victims by midnight, or I pursue the maximum sentence, 20 years. Federal prison. The ink on my father's signed confession was barely dry when the consequences of their supreme arrogance caught up to them. Desmond and Valerie Washington had chosen to forfeit their massive suburban estate to avoid spending their lives in a federal penitentiary. They left the downtown federal building completely stripped of all false dignity, walking out into the humid evening air without their swagger. They took a silent, miserable taxi ride back to the exclusive gated community they had ruled for 3 decades. They hoped to quickly pack suitcases, gather hidden cash, and figure out a way to spin this disaster to their remaining social circle. But I made sure their luxurious downfall would be swift, public, and absolutely devastating. By the time their yellow taxi pulled up to the long driveway of their pristine neighborhood, the reality of their signed agreement was already fully in motion. My parents stepped out of the taxi and froze in horror. The grand suburban estate that served as the ultimate symbol of their manufactured black excellence was currently being completely dismantled. 4 massive moving trucks were parked across the manicured front lawn, destroying the expensive landscaping. Men in dark uniforms were systematically hauling out every single piece of luxury furniture, custom artwork, and crystal chandelier that my parents purchased with stolen money. 2 stern-faced federal marshals were standing on the front porch, physically taping a bright yellow federal seizure and eviction notice directly onto the grand mahogany front doors. The illusion was entirely over. The neighbors who worshipped my parents just 24 hours ago were now standing on their porches holding cups of evening tea, watching the glorious destruction of the Washington Empire with greedy, fascinated eyes. My father stumbled forward, his shoulders completely slumped, trying to comprehend the sheer speed of his total ruin. He opened his mouth to shout a command at the movers, but his booming pastoral voice completely failed him. He was no longer the powerful patriarch of a wealthy family. He was just a broke, disgraced criminal watching his stolen kingdom evaporate. My mother let out a shrill, panicked cry and tried to run toward the doors to stop a mover from carrying out her favorite antique vases. A federal marshal instantly stepped into her path, raising a firm hand and ordering her to stay back from seized government property. "You do not own anything inside this house anymore, Ma," the marshal stated, his voice loud enough for gossiping neighbors to hear. "Your access to this property has been permanently revoked." Before Valerie could launch into a desperate theatrical tantrum, a loud, violent crash echoed from the side of the sprawling driveway. Chloe, the undisputed golden child of the family, was having a complete psychotic meltdown. She was standing next to her luxury sport utility vehicle, frantically hurling designer handbags, expensive silk dresses, and velvet shoeboxes directly into the trunk with manic, aggressive energy. Her perfect hair was tangled, and her face was streaked with ruined mascara. She looked like a cornered wild animal, entirely stripped of her usual arrogant grace. Seeing our parents standing helplessly on the sidewalk, Chloe slammed the trunk of her car shut and marched aggressively toward them. The perfect, flawless family dynamic instantly dissolved into toxic, vicious warfare. They turned on each other like rabid, starving dogs fighting over a scrap of meat. "This is all your fault!" Chloe screamed, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at our father face. "You promised me Bryce was a brilliant investor. You told me marrying him would secure my future forever. Now my husband is sitting in a federal holding cell, taking a plea deal to save his own skin, and the government is freezing every single one of my personal bank accounts. You ruined my life." Desmond's face twisted with sudden, furious indignation. He had just lost his entire fortune and his freedom, and he refused to accept blame from his spoiled, ungrateful daughter. "Do not you dare raise your voice to me!" Desmond roared, taking a threatening step toward Chloe. "We gave you everything. We bought you that lavish lifestyle because you demanded perfection. You knew exactly where the money was coming from." Valerie tried to step between them, crying hysterically and begging them to stop fighting in front of the watching neighborhood. But Chloe aggressively shoved her mother's hands away. "You are pathetic," Chloe spat, her voice dripping with pure, absolute venom. "You let Nia destroy us. You were supposed to be powerful and untouchable, but you let the sister we all hated humiliate us and take everything we own. You are both completely worthless to me now." Chloe turned her back on the parents who worshipped her for 30 years. She climbed into her luxury vehicle, slammed the heavy door locked, and sped recklessly out of the driveway, leaving Desmond and Valerie alone on the cold concrete curb. As the taillights of Chloe's car disappeared down the dark street, a loud metallic clang echoed through the neighborhood. The federal marshals had finally chained and padlocked the massive iron gates of the Washington estate. A freezing downpour suddenly began to wash over the street. The heavy rain instantly soaked through my father's expensive tailored suit and plastered my mother's carefully styled hair flat against her terrified face. They stood shivering on the wet sidewalk, staring through the locked gates at the empty mansion that used to be their entire world. Their bank accounts were frozen. Their rich friends had completely abandoned them. They had absolutely nowhere to go and no money to buy a warm hotel room for the night. As the freezing rain continued to beat down upon them, Desmond slowly pulled out his cell phone. His hands shook violently as he scrolled through his contacts. There was only one person left in the entire city who possessed the immense financial resources and the highly secure housing necessary to take them in from the bitter, biting cold. The yellow taxicab smelled faintly of stale smoke and damp upholstery. It was a humiliating downgrade from the luxury vehicles they drove hours before. Desmond, Valerie, and Chloe crammed into the back seat, shivering violently, in soaked designer clothes as the cab navigated the rain-swept highways toward Manhattan. They pooled the last of their crumpled cash to pay the fare, pulling up to the towering glass facade of my ultra-secure high-rise building on Billionaires Row. The sheer scale of the architecture intimidated them. My building required extreme wealth they only ever pretended to possess. They huddled under the grand awning, completely drenched and pathetic. My father tried to use his booming voice to intimidate the strict concierge. When his arrogance failed spectacularly, my mother switched to emotional manipulation. She burst into theatrical tears, sobbing about a devastating family emergency and a pregnant daughter left out in the freezing storm. The concierge remained professional, but skeptical. He dialed my private line. I was sitting on my custom Italian leather sofa, watching the rain beat against the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the breathtaking Manhattan skyline. When the concierge announced their desperate arrival, I instructed him to send them up. I wanted them to see exactly what kind of empire I had built, without their approval. The private secure elevator opened directly into my massive penthouse. The warm, glowing ambient light and the soft sound of jazz playing provided a sharp contrast to the miserable, freezing figures standing in my foyer. My parents and my sister stepped off the elevator, dripping dirty rainwater onto my pristine imported hardwood floors. They looked around the massive open-concept living room, taking in the original modern art, the wraparound balcony, and the undeniable evidence of my massive financial success. Their eyes widened with a sickening mixture of pure awe and deep calculating greed. They instantly realized that my wealth dwarfed anything they had ever stolen. Nia, my mother, cried out, rushing forward with her arms outstretched, attempting a desperate maternal hug. We have lost everything. The federal agents threw us out into the street. You have to help us. Blood is thicker than water, Nia. We are family, and family must stick together when the devil attacks. I calmly took a step back, raising a single hand to halt her approach. I did not offer them a towel or a hot drink. I stood perfectly still, forcing them to endure the biting chill of their wet clothes. The devil did not attack you, Mom, I said, my voice smooth and unbothered. The Department of Justice attacked you because you committed federal fraud. Those are two completely different things. Desmond stepped forward, trying to summon the remnants of his shattered patriarchal authority. Nia, please, he pleaded, his voice lacking its usual thunder. We have nowhere else to go. All of our bank accounts are frozen. The country club canceled our memberships. We just need to stay in your guest rooms for a few weeks until my lawyers sort out this terrible misunderstanding. We can rebuild. We just need you to shelter us. Chloe shoved past our parents, shivering violently as she wrapped her wet arms around her pregnant belly. She tried to soften her expression, attempting to manufacture a look of innocent sisterly affection. Nia, look at us, she begged, her voice trembling. We used to protect each other. Do you remember when we were 7 years old and you were crying in your room? I gave you my favorite porcelain doll just to make you smile. That is what sisters do. We share what we have. Please, Nia. I am pregnant and my husband is in jail. I need my sister right now. I stared at Chloe, letting a cold, humorless smile touch my lips. You really believe your own lies, do you not? Chloe, I asked, tilting my head. You did not give me that stupid, fragile porcelain doll out of the genuine kindness of your completely selfish heart. You snuck into my bedroom and stole that doll from my toy box. You broke the left arm off because you were throwing a tantrum. You only gave it back to me because Mom threatened to ground you for stealing. You have never been generous a single day in your life. You simply return the things you have already completely ruined and demand to be praised for it. Chloe's mouth snapped shut, her fake tears drying up instantly as her nostalgic manipulation fell completely flat. The entire family stood frozen, realizing that their usual toxic tactics were entirely useless against me. I had completely immunized myself against their emotional blackmail. Nia, I am begging you as your father, Desmond said, his voice dropping to a pathetic whisper. Look at this massive place. You have more than enough space for us. Just give us a place to sleep tonight. We are freezing. I turned away from them and walked slowly toward the massive white marble coffee table resting in the center of the room. I picked up a single crisp piece of heavy cardstock paper that I had printed out earlier that evening. I walked back toward my father, holding the document between my fingers. Desmond's eyes lit up with sudden greedy hope. He assumed it was a blank check or a lease agreement for a luxury hotel suite. He eagerly reached his hand out, expecting me to finally fulfill my lifelong role as the dutiful financial savior of the Washington family. I did not hand him the paper. I placed it flat on the massive marble coffee table and slowly slid it across the smooth surface until it stopped directly in front of him. It was a meticulously itemized legal invoice displaying 5 years of extremely expensive luxury medical care costs. I am not giving you a place to sleep, I said, my voice echoing with lethal finality in the quiet penthouse. I am finally giving you a very heavy bill. Desmond stared down at the crisp piece of cardstock paper resting on the heavy white marble coffee table. His trembling hand hovered over it for a split second, his eyes scanning the numbers printed in clean, precise columns. The greedy, desperate hope that had just flashed across his face turned into pure, icy confusion. He did not find a blank check, a bank transfer confirmation, or a lease agreement for a luxury hotel suite. He was looking at a detailed 5-year medical ledger from a premier private care facility located upstate. The total at the bottom reached hundreds of thousands of dollars, all completely paid for by a corporate entity his arrogant mind could not recognize. Valerie leaned over his shoulder, her wet hair dripping onto the pristine marble, as she tried to make sense of the clinical terms. Chloe stood frozen, breathing heavily, her eyes darting between the paper and my completely unbothered expression. "What is this, Nia?" Desmond stammered, his voice shaking as he pointed a wrinkled finger at the itemized columns. "Why are you showing us a medical bill from some random private clinic when we are standing here drenched, freezing, and homeless? We need shelter right now, not financial paperwork from a hospital." I took a slow, methodical sip of my mineral water, setting the crystal glass down on the table with a soft click. "This is the bill for Grandmother Washington care," I said, my voice carrying a smooth, lethal calm that cut through the warmth of the penthouse. "The exact grandmother you both told the entire family had passed away 5 years ago." Valerie choked on her breath, stepping back as if she had been physically struck. Her face turned an unnatural shade of gray beneath her ruined makeup. Chloe's eyes widened in sudden terror, her hands dropping from her pregnant belly as the final magnificent family lie was stripped bare right in front of them. 5 years ago, when Bryce first entered the family and demanded capital to fund his bankrupt real estate scams, my parents reached a point of absolute desperation. Grandmother Washington possessed a massive historic life insurance policy alongside a substantial private estate. To access that money immediately, without waiting for nature to take its course, Desmond and Valerie devised an incredibly monstrous plan. They quietly forged her signature on power of attorney documents, moved her out of her beloved home, and officially reported to the church congregation, the country club, and the extended high society that she had peacefully passed away in her sleep. They even staged a small closed casket memorial service, weeping beautiful theatrical tears for the cameras. They cashed in her multi-million-dollar policy, using the blood money to buy their grand suburban mansion fund, Chloe Lavish Destination Wedding, and give Bryce the capital to jumpstart his fraudulent Ponzi scheme. They literally built their elite status on the living grave of my father-owned mother. They thought they had committed the perfect crime because they dumped her in a neglected, understaffed, state-run facility under an assumed name, ensuring nobody would ever find her. They left her there to be forgotten, treating her like excess baggage that threatened their prestigious image of Black excellence. But they completely underestimated my skills as a forensic investigator. I tracked the anomalies in her life insurance payouts 3 years ago while building my case against Bryce. I discovered the horrifying truth, and I did not hesitate. I secretly used my own legitimate financial resources to move Grandmother Washington out of that abusive state-run warehouse. I placed her in the most luxurious private care facility in the country, completely funding her advanced medical treatments, rehabilitation, and round-the-clock personal care out of my own pocket for 5 long years. I protected her while her own children celebrated her fake death with expensive champagne. You stole her life insurance policy and left her to die in squalor just to buy your country club status, I said, looking directly into my father's hollow, terrified eyes. You told everyone she was gone because her existence was an inconvenient expense to your social climbing ambitions. You sacrificed your own mother just like you tried to sacrifice me. Desmond dropped the invoice, his knees shaking so violently he had to grab the back of the velvet sofa to keep from collapsing onto the floor. "Nia, please, you cannot tell anyone about this," he whispered, his voice entirely stripped of any remaining patriarchal power. It was a financial necessity at the time. The family was drowning. If the church finds out, if the press gets hold of this, we will be completely destroyed. Our name will be ruined forever. "Your name is already completely ruined, Desmond," I replied, stepping closer to him. "The guests at your survival dinner watched the FBI haul Marcus and Bryce away in chains. Your church is currently being audited by the federal government. The high society you worshipped is laughing at your spectacular downfall right now. You spent decades hiding your darkness behind a fake holy mask, but the mask has been permanently ripped off." Chloe let out a sharp, panicked sob, shaking her head in frantic denial. "You are a monster, Nia!" she screamed, her voice cracking with pure, absolute malice. "You planned this whole thing. You have been holding on to this secret for years. just to wait for the perfect moment to completely execute us. You are pure evil. I did not bother responding to her childish tantrum. I simply turned my head toward the heavy electronic double doors of the penthouse elevator. The soft mechanical chime echoed through the quiet room, signaling that someone was ascending. The sleek metal doors smoothly slid open, revealing the bright interior of the elevator cab. Desmond, Valerie, and Chloe slowly turned their heads toward the opening, expecting another team of federal marshals coming to arrest them for insurance fraud. Instead, the room fell into a deathly suffocating silence as a motorized wheelchair smoothly rolled forward out of the elevator. Sitting elegantly in the chair was Grandmother Washington. At 88 years old, she did not look like the frail, dying woman my parents had abandoned in a state clinic. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her posture was remarkably straight, and her eyes flashed with a sharp, piercing intelligence that had not faded with age. She wore a beautiful tailored blue dress and carried an aura of absolute dignity. She stopped her wheelchair in the center of the foyer, staring directly at her eldest son Desmond with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are completely dead to me, son," Grandmother Washington said, her voice clear, unslurred, and dripping with lethal finality in the quiet penthouse. "Get out of my granddaughter house right now." 1 week passed in a blur of frantic federal filings and intense trial preparation behind the scenes. Deep within the concrete walls of the Metropolitan Detention Center, the flashy custom-tailored suits and expensive diamond watches were nothing but a distant memory. Bryce sat on the edge of a narrow metal cot, staring blankly at the stained, cinder-block walls of his secure holding cell. The crushing reality of his catastrophic downfall had finally penetrated his thick armor of supreme privilege. The high-priced defense attorneys his family desperately scrambled to hire had reviewed the 40-page federal indictment I dropped on the table, and their initial assessment was absolutely brutal. Bryce was looking at multiple severe counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, and interstate money laundering. Without a massive miracle, he was facing 3 decades inside a maximum security federal penitentiary. He had spent his entire life sweet-talking his way out of consequences, relying on his family name and his slick charm to handle his financial messes. But the federal authorities did not care about his old money pedigree. The concrete floor was freezing, and the thin orange jumpsuit he wore offered no protection against the cold. He was entirely alone, stripped of his luxury leased Bentley, his expensive country club bourbon, and his adoring internet audience. He knew his tattered empire was completely gone. Bryce's animalistic survival instincts completely took over the moment he realized the Washington family would gladly let him rot in prison if it meant saving their own tattered reputation. He knew my father Desmond and my brother Marcus were already desperately looking for a legal loophole to dump all the blame onto his shoulders. Bryce decided he was not going to be the lone fall guy for a family of hypocrites. He aggressively pounded his fists against the heavy steel mesh door of his cell, demanding an immediate emergency meeting with the lead federal prosecutors. I watched through the live security feed in the adjacent monitoring room as he sat across from 2 assistant United States attorneys, his hands shaking violently as he clutched a paper cup of lukewarm water. He did not offer a grand defense or maintain his innocent victim routine anymore. He eagerly opened his mouth to negotiate terms before the official trial date could even be set by the federal court to secure his own legal protection. "I can give you the real masterminds of this entire multi-million-dollar fraud," Bryce told the prosecutors, his voice trembling with a frantic, desperate energy. He offered a full, unconditional guilty plea in exchange for a massive reduction in his sentence. He was completely willing to sign any confession as long as it kept him out of a high-security prison for the rest of his life. The prosecutors demanded a complete, itemized breakdown of the entire Ponzi scheme, including the exact names of everyone who profited from the fraudulent public funds. Bryce did not hesitate for a single second. He formally and ruthlessly flipped on the entire Washington family, turning his weapon of deception directly toward the very people who had worshipped him as their ultimate social prize. Bryce signed a comprehensive 30-page affidavit detailing how my father Desmond and my brother Marcus were the true driving forces behind the real estate scam. He claimed under oath that Desmond had approached him years ago demanding massive financial returns to fund the family country club lifestyle and Valerie's insatiable thirst for luxury designer brands to display their fake prosperity to their wealthy neighbors. Bryce framed himself as a helpless, submissive puppet who was aggressively pressured into expanding the fraudulent investments by the powerful patriarch. He provided exact dates and times showing Marcus using his megachurch pulpit to actively target vulnerable elderly church members, pushing them to invest their life savings into the Blessed Horizons Fund. Bryce proved that Marcus used the stolen youth ministry cash to pay off the mortgage on his secret downtown bachelor pad and explicitly stated that the family elders approved of the fraudulent wire transfers to keep their pristine image alive. He threw his entire adoptive family directly under the bus, completely destroying Desmond and Marcus' legal defense to secure his own plea deal. The federal prosecution team immediately accepted the plea agreement and updated their official witness list for the upcoming trial. Following federal protocol, they leaked the updated legal documents directly to the defense team. My sister Chloe had spent the entire week hiding from the public eye, avoiding the media trucks parked outside her apartment, and refusing to accept the reality of her ruined marriage and shattered expectations, while crying in absolute despair over the unexpected fall of her beautiful golden status in high society completely. She still fiercely believed that her marriage was an unbreakable bond. She arrived at the detention center expecting a romantic reunion with her white knight. Chloe grabbed the phone receiver tightly, pressing her hand against the scratched glass partition. "Bryce, sweetheart, we are going to get through this," she said, her voice cracking. "Dad is raising money to defeat Nia lies. I love you." Bryce let out a short, hollow laugh that sounded incredibly cruel. "You need to stop talking, Chloe," he said, his expression completely cold. "There is no we anymore. I just signed a federal plea deal and turned over every single document on your family. I told the prosecutors that Desmond and Marcus forced me into the Ponzi scheme to fund your expensive country club lifestyle. I am the primary star witness for the government. Your father and your brother are going to federal prison for 20 years, and I am the one putting them there." Chloe sat completely paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The receiver slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the counter with a loud clang as she realized her husband had just completely executed her entire family to save himself tonight. The heavy plastic receiver clattered against the scratched metal counter, swinging violently by its thick metal cord. Chloe sat perfectly paralyzed behind the reinforced glass, her manicured hands trembling as she stared at the empty chair on the other side. Bryce had already stood up and walked back to his holding cell without looking over his shoulder. He left his glamorous wife completely shattered in the sterile visitation room, her entire world collapsing into dust. 6 months later, that same devastating reality settled over the grand federal courthouse. The highly anticipated trial of the century had officially begun. The massive mahogany courtroom was packed to absolute capacity. Every single wooden bench groaned under the weight of eager local media reporters, furious elite country club executives, and dozens of heartbroken elderly church members who had lost their entire life savings. The air inside the courtroom was thick with suffocating tension. Desmond and Marcus sat at the defense table wearing cheap, oversized prison-issue suits that stripped them of their manufactured pastoral and patriarchal authority. They looked pathetic, hunched over yellow legal pads, frantically whispering to their expensive defense attorneys. But the absolute star of the morning session was the prosecution primary cooperating witness. Bryce took the stand and delivered a flawless, Oscar-worthy performance. He wore a crisp, conservative gray suit and slicked his hair down perfectly, playing the role of the innocent, naive outsider. Bryce wept beautifully for the jury. He pulled out a white handkerchief and dabbed at his eyes as he spun a magnificent fictional tale of severe emotional manipulation. He leaned heavily into deeply ingrained social tropes, painting himself as a helpless, intimidated white man who had been ruthlessly bullied by a powerful, demanding black family. He claimed he married Chloe out of pure love, but was immediately suffocated by Desmond, aggressive demands for excessive wealth. Bryce swore under oath that my father and my brother physically threatened him and forced him to set up the fraudulent real estate shell companies. He testified that Marcus used his imposing megachurch influence to extort the vulnerable congregation and funneled the cash to Bryce, with strict orders to hide it offshore. I was just trying to keep my wife happy and her terrifying family satisfied. Bryce cried softly, gripping the edges of the wooden witness stand. I was trapped in their greedy web and I had absolutely no way out. The jury ate it up. Several jurors nodded in deep sympathy, completely captivated by his spectacular lies. Bryce's defense team had negotiated a sweet plea deal contingent upon his full cooperation, and his testimony was successfully burying my father and my brother alive. Desmond defense attorney, a highly aggressive corporate lawyer named Harrison, realized his clients were sinking fast. He needed a miracle to completely discredit Bryce and save the Washington patriarchs. The defense calls our final expert witness, Harrison announced, his voice echoing across the silent courtroom. We call the lead forensic auditor for the Department of Justice to the stand. A collective gasp ripped through the packed gallery as the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. I walked down the center aisle wearing a pristine navy blue tailored suit, my posture perfectly straight and my expression completely unreadable. Desmond and Marcus looked up from their legal pads, their eyes widening in sudden desperate hope. They foolishly believed that because I shared their last name and because Bryce had cheated on my sister, I would eagerly use my federal authority to destroy him and inadvertently save them. They thought I was their ultimate rescuing angel. I walked confidently to the witness box, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the absolute truth. I sat down and adjusted the microphone. Harrison approached the podium, practically beaming with smug confidence. Agent Washington Harrison began flipping open a massive financial dossier. You have thoroughly reviewed every single bank record, wire transfer, and offshore holding company associated with this massive fraud. Bryce just testified that he was a helpless victim forced into this scheme by your father and your brother. As a federal forensic expert, does the mathematical data support his tragic story? I looked directly at Bryce, who was sitting at the prosecution table. The arrogant smirk he had worn all morning vanished instantly, replaced by sheer naked terror. The mathematical data completely destroys his tragic story. I stated, my voice calm and razor-sharp, projecting clearly through the courtroom speakers. Bryce was not a helpless victim or an intimidated outsider. The forensic blockchain analysis proves that he personally engineered the initial offshore shell company architecture 6 full months before he ever met my father. He was the singular mastermind of the financial routing system. Harrison smiled widely, turning to the jury in absolute triumph. So you are confirming that Bryce acted alone and manipulated my clients? I did not smile back. I turned my head and locked eyes with my father and my brother. I did not come here to save them. I came here to ensure absolute justice. I am confirming that Bryce was the principal architect of the fraud. I clarified, my voice slicing through the heavy silence. However, the data also definitively proves that Desmond and Marcus Washington were highly eager, completely willing, and incredibly greedy accomplices. The ledgers show that Pastor Marcus personally authorized 94 distinct illegal wire transfers from the church youth fund directly into Bryce accounts. Furthermore, I have authorized digital signatures proving Desmond Washington actively recruited 52 country club members into the Ponzi scheme, receiving a 20% illegal kickback for every single victim he delivered to his son-in-law. The courtroom erupted into absolute chaos. The judge aggressively slammed her wooden gavel, demanding order as the betrayed church members began screaming from the gallery. Desmond completely collapsed into his hands, weeping. Marcus buried his face, realizing I destroyed Bryce's false narrative while proving my father and brother would never ever escape justice right now. I stepped down from the wooden witness box, leaving destruction in my wake. The defense attorneys for my father and brother did not attempt to cross-examine me. They knew questioning a senior federal forensic auditor about irrefutable mathematical blockchain data would only cement their client's guilt. The prosecution rested its case immediately after I walked down the center aisle. Closing arguments were swift and brutal. The judge handed final instructions to the jury and dismissed them to begin formal deliberations. In complex financial fraud cases, federal juries often take days or weeks to untangle the dense web of transactions and reach a unanimous conclusion. But my meticulously organized digital evidence left no room for reasonable doubt. The mahogany doors closed behind the 12 jurors and the suffocating wait began. The marble hallway outside the courtroom was thick with unbearable tension. Reporters paced back and forth, holding microphones, waiting for any sign of a verdict. I stood quietly near the elevator banks, flanked by my two assigned security details. 50 feet away, the shattered remains of the Washington family sat clustered on a wooden bench. Valerie was hyperventilating, clutching her designer handbag like a life preserver. Bryce stood leaning against the marble wall, nervously checking his watch and avoiding eye contact with everyone. The intense pressure cooker of impending federal prison time caused my mother to completely snap. Valerie dropped her purse and lunged directly at her prized white son-in-law. She screamed like a feral animal, raising her manicured hands and slashing her fingernails across Bryce's cheek. She cursed him for ruining her prestigious country club life and dragging her golden family into the mud. Bryce shouted, raising his arms to shield his bleeding face while shoving my mother backward against the hard stone wall. Before Desmond or Marcus could intervene, 3 armed court bailiffs rushed down the corridor. They violently pulled Valerie away from Bryce, pinning her arms behind her back and threatening to arrest her for assault right inside the federal courthouse. My mother sobbed hysterically, her flawless socialite facade replaced by the frantic desperation of a broken woman. Just as the bailiffs were separating the shouting family members, a loud, sharp buzzer echoed through the long corridor. The courtroom deputy stepped out of the double doors and announced that the jury had reached a decision. It had been less than 3 hours. Such a remarkably fast deliberation always meant one thing. The jury did not need to debate the evidence because the guilt was absolutely overwhelming. We filed back into the massive courtroom, taking our respective seats. The heavy silence was deafening as the 12 jurors marched back into their designated box. Desmond, Marcus, and Bryce stood behind the defense tables, trembling violently. Bryce was bleeding slightly from the deep scratch on his cheek, while my father gripped the edge of the wooden table so hard his knuckles turned completely white. The judge asked the jury foreman if they had reached a unanimous verdict on all criminal charges. The foreman stood up tall and handed a stack of sealed papers to the bailiff, who passed them directly to the judge. The judge reviewed the documents with a stern, unreadable expression before handing them back to the clerk to read aloud for the official public record. On the first count of conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud regarding the defendant Bryce, the jury finds the defendant guilty. On the second count of interstate money laundering, guilty. On the first count of ecclesiastical grand larceny regarding the defendant Marcus Washington, guilty. On the primary count of orchestrating a fraudulent financial enterprise regarding the defendant Desmond Washington, guilty. The clerk continued reading down the massive 40-page indictment, and the word guilty echoed like continuous hammer strikes against an iron anvil. Guilty on all 57 federal counts. The courtroom exploded into a chaotic symphony of intense emotion. The elderly church members in the gallery cheered and wept, hugging each other as they finally witnessed absolute justice. At the defense table, the reaction was pure, unfiltered devastation. Bryce collapsed back into his heavy wooden chair, burying his bleeding face in his shaking hands. Marcus fell to his knees on the courtroom floor, crying out to a god he had relentlessly mocked with his greed. Desmond stared straight ahead, his mouth open in silent shock, unable to comprehend that his black excellence empire had resulted in a massive federal prison sentence. The presiding judge slammed her wooden gavel hard against the sounding block, demanding immediate order. Given the severe flight risk and the extreme magnitude of the financial crimes committed, the judge announced, her voice carrying lethal finality, "I am revoking all previous bail agreements. The defendants are hereby remanded immediately into federal custody pending their final sentencing hearings. Court is adjourned. Four heavily armed federal marshals advanced on the defense table. They forcefully grabbed Bryce, Marcus, and Desmond, pulling their arms sharply behind their backs. The harsh metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly over the wailing cries of my mother, who collapsed onto the wooden gallery bench in sheer agony. They hauled the three disgraced men away toward the holding cells, completely stripping them of their freedom and their arrogant pride forever. I stood at the prosecution table, organizing my evidence binders and sliding my laptop into my leather briefcase. The victory was absolute and the justice perfectly clean. I snapped the clasp shut and turned to look up at the gallery seating. I wanted to see the final expression of defeat on my sister's face. I scanned the rows of cheering victims, but the seat Chloe occupied all morning was completely empty. My mother was sobbing alone, surrounded by strangers. Chloe was gone. An ominous chill suddenly washed over my skin. I signaled my security team, gripping my briefcase tightly as I headed down toward the dark, isolated basement parking garage. I pushed through the heavy painted steel doors and stepped into the freezing, damp subterranean parking structure. The thick concrete walls completely absorbed the loud sounds of the chaotic courthouse, leaving me in an eerie, suffocating silence. The air down here was damp and smelled heavily of motor oil and exhaust fumes. My leather heels clicked rhythmically against the pavement, echoing loudly across the vast, empty underground structure. I pulled my car keys from my pocket and pressed the unlock button. The headlights of my vehicle flashed twice in the dim fluorescent lighting. As I stepped closer to the driver's side door, a sudden sharp scrape of metal dragging against concrete shattered the quiet atmosphere. I stopped moving immediately, my survival instincts kicking into high gear. A tall, menacing shadow slowly detached itself from the thick concrete pillar directly behind my parked car. It was my sister Chloe. The undisputed golden child of the Washington family was completely unrecognizable. She looked absolutely frantic and completely unhinged. Her expensive designer silk dress was heavily wrinkled and stained with sweat. She had torn off her high heels, standing barefoot on the filthy garage floor. Her perfect hair was a tangled, messy nest around her pale face, and her mascara was smeared darkly under her wild, frantic eyes. In her right hand, she tightly gripped a heavy, solid steel tire iron. The heavy metal tool scraped loudly against the ground as she took a slow, menacing step toward me. She was no longer the smug, arrogant princess who had laughed at me during my birthday ambush. She was a deeply broken, desperate woman who had just watched her entire fake reality disintegrate into permanent dust. "You took absolutely everything away from me tonight," Chloe screamed loudly, her angry voice echoing violently across the empty, dark parking levels. "You ruined my perfect life, Nia. You sent my husband to federal prison, and you destroyed our family name forever. I finally had everything I ever wanted in my entire life. I was beautiful and incredibly wealthy and universally respected by everyone. Now all of my personal bank accounts are completely frozen by the government. My friends have blocked my phone number. The country club banned me from the property. I have absolutely nothing left because of you." She raised the heavy metal tire iron, pointing the rusted tip directly at my chest. "You were supposed to be the family failure," Chloe sobbed, her body shaking with pure, unfiltered rage. "You were supposed to stay in the shadows and pay our bills so I could shine. You stole my life, and I'm going to make you pay for it right now." I stood perfectly still, watching my older sister completely unravel in the dim fluorescent light. I did not drop my briefcase, and I did not reach for my phone. "You did this entirely to yourself, Chloe," I said, my voice incredibly calm and completely flat. "You built a fake life on a foundation of stolen money and arrogant lies. I did not force Bryce to run a fraudulent scheme, and I did not force Mom and Dad to steal from elderly church members. You eagerly enjoyed the luxurious spoils of their terrible crimes without ever asking where the massive amounts of cash came from. You are not an innocent victim here today. You are just upset because the endless free ride is finally over." The brutal, undeniable truth hit her like a heavy physical blow. her pale face violently twisted into a terrifying mask of pure demonic fury. Chloe let out a terrifying feral scream and lunged aggressively across the concrete floor. She swung the heavy steel tire iron with all of her might, aiming directly for my head, intending to cause massive, catastrophic physical harm. I did not flinch. I did not panic. Thanks to months of intensive federal defensive training, I simply shifted my weight and effortlessly sidestepped her erratic, clumsy attack. The heavy metal weapon sliced through the empty air, missing my face by mere inches. The aggressive momentum of her own wild swing threw Chloe completely off balance, causing her to stumble forward awkwardly past my shoulder. Before she could recover her footing and raise the weapon for a second desperate strike, the dark shadows of the parking garage suddenly burst into explosive motion. "Drop the metal weapon right now," a booming male voice loudly commanded. Two massive, highly trained plainclothes federal agents, who had been discreetly assigned as my personal protective security detail, emerged instantly from behind a parked black sport utility vehicle. They moved across the concrete with terrifying and absolute lethal speed. The first agent aggressively grabbed Chloe's raised arm forcefully, twisting her wrist until she screamed and dropped the heavy metal tire iron. The dangerous weapon hit the pavement with a loud, echoing metallic clang. The second agent aggressively grabbed her shoulders and swiftly tackled her directly to the hard, filthy concrete floor. They pinned the screaming golden child face down against the cold ground, snapping heavy steel handcuffs tightly around her wrists. Chloe thrashed violently, kicking her bare feet against the pavement and sobbing hysterically as the federal agents completely neutralized her dangerous attack in a matter of seconds. I slowly and calmly walked over to where my ruined older sister was firmly pinned against the cold, dirty concrete ground. The elite suburban princess who had spent 33 years mocking my existence was now completely powerless, weeping pathetic tears into the motor oil stains. I carefully crouched down gracefully, keeping my expensive tailored suit perfectly clean, and looked directly into her frantic, wide, terrified eyes. My calm expression was completely devoid of any lingering anger or deep sisterly compassion, holding only cold, pure, and absolute finality. "I never, ever stole absolutely anything from you in my entire life, Chloe," I whispered, my voice perfectly steady, sharp, and clear. "I simply just stopped blindly paying the incredibly massive bill for all of your ridiculous delusions." 2 years have passed since the cold concrete of that dark underground parking garage echoed with the final desperate screams of the Washington family golden child. The transition from that dark, damp basement to the brilliant golden sunlight of my current reality feels exactly like waking up from a lifelong, suffocating nightmare. The morning air flowing freely through the massive open glass doors of my new beachfront property in Malibu is incredibly warm and perfectly seasoned with the fresh scent of sea salt. I stand in my spacious open-concept living room, peacefully listening to the soothing rhythmic sound of ocean waves crashing gently against the pristine white shoreline just a few steps away from my back deck. A sleek flat-screen television is quietly playing the local morning news in the background, providing a stark contrast to the absolute breathtaking tranquility of my wonderful new life right now. The local news anchor voice catches my full attention as she begins a retrospective segment on one of the most spectacular high society downfalls in recent financial history. The screen displays a highly detailed courtroom sketch of my disgraced father Desmond and my arrogant brother Marcus. The anchor details how the two former pillars of the community are currently serving their mandatory 20-year sentences in a high-security federal penitentiary. They have been entirely stripped of their expensive tailored suits, their prestigious country club memberships, and their booming pastoral authority. They now wear matching orange jumpsuits, spending their days in a bleak concrete cell, completely isolated from the luxurious world they sacrificed their own flesh and blood to maintain. The megachurch they once used to exploit vulnerable elderly members has been permanently dissolved, its assets completely liquidated by the federal government to provide restitution to the countless innocent victims they ruthlessly defrauded. The broadcast smoothly transitions to footage captured by a local investigative journalist just a few weeks ago. The camera zooms in on a grim-faced woman wearing a cheap polyester uniform shirt, ringing up items behind the checkout counter of a discount retail store. It is my older sister, Chloe. The once untouchable suburban princess who constantly demanded absolute perfection and ruthlessly bullied everyone around her, is now working a minimum wage shift just to afford her basic groceries. Her designer wardrobe and arrogant smirk are completely gone, replaced by the hollow, exhausted stare of a woman who finally has to pay her own bills without a stolen safety net. The news segment then cuts to a brief shot of a dilapidated subsidized apartment building on the outskirts of the city. That is where my mother Valerie currently resides. She lives entirely alone in a tiny, cramped unit, completely ostracized by every single one of her former wealthy friends. The high society women she spent decades desperately trying to impress now actively treat her ruined name like a highly contagious disease, refusing to ever even acknowledge her sad, lonely existence anymore. I reach across the smooth marble kitchen island and press the power button on the television remote. The screen instantly goes black, cutting off the grim reality of the people who spent 33 years trying to destroy my spirit. I feel not a single ounce of guilt or sadness for their current miserable circumstances. They simply reaped exactly what they deliberately sowed. I turn my back on the empty television screen and walk slowly out onto the sprawling, sun-drenched patio, breathing in the fresh, salt air. The warm ocean breeze gently tosses my hair as I step fully out into the brilliant California sunlight. Sitting very comfortably in a shaded lounge chair directly facing the beautiful blue ocean is Grandmother Washington. She looks incredibly healthy and radiantly happy, a colorful woven blanket draped softly over her lap. She looks up at me and lets out a joyful musical laugh as a seagull swoops playfully past the balcony railing. A tall, handsome man slowly walks out through the heavy glass doors behind me, stepping onto the wooden deck. He is not a flashy, arrogant con artist wearing a completely fake identity. He is a genuine, supportive partner who values my intelligence, respects my fierce independence, and treats me with absolute equality every single day. He smiles warmly, his bright eyes crinkling at the corners, and hands me a delicate crystal glass filled with nicely chilled white wine. He places a very gentle, comforting kiss on my forehead before walking over to sit beside my grandmother, engaging her in a light-hearted conversation that makes her smile brightly. I stand perfectly still near the outer edge of the wooden deck, resting my hand against the smooth glass railing and looking directly out at the endless expanse of the sparkling Pacific Ocean stretching out before me. I take a slow, deep breath of the clean ocean air, letting the profound, absolute peace of this moment completely wash over my soul. For my entire life, I foolishly believed that I had to fight a constant, exhausting war just to earn a tiny scrap of basic human respect from people who were fundamentally incapable of loving me. I thought justice meant forcing them to finally see my worth and acknowledge my value. But standing here in the magnificent, brilliant light of my own hard-earned success, I finally realized the absolute truth. The sweetest, most satisfying revenge was never about watching my abusers suffer in prison or seeing them struggle in poverty. The ultimate triumph was simply stepping entirely out of their toxic, suffocating shadow. It was about taking all of my brilliant energy and using it to build a life so incredibly beautiful, so fiercely protected, and so brilliantly peaceful that their inherent darkness could never ever reach me or touch my spirit again. I take a slow sip of my wine, letting a genuine, unburdened smile spread across my face as I watch the ocean waves rolling gracefully toward the shore, knowing my beautiful story is finally my own. The greatest lesson from this story is that your worth is never determined by toxic family members who constantly diminish you to protect their fragile egos. True justice is not just about exposing their malicious lies and criminal actions to the world, though that accountability is absolutely necessary. The ultimate triumph is stepping out of their dark shadow to build a brilliant, peaceful life entirely on your own terms. Blood does not excuse abuse, and walking away is a profound act of absolute freedom. If you found this story empowering, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below right now.